Hello, Goodman Games fans, and welcome to another episode of the Scrivenery. We have come again to talk to you about third-party publishing for Goodman Games products. As usual, I am Ed Stanek of Oregon Games. Here's my co-host.
Hi, I'm Trevor Stamper of Blind Visionary Publications.
And this week we have a very special guest for you, Mr. Joseph Goodman.
Hi, I'm Joseph Goodman of Goodman Games.
Well, welcome, Joseph. Thanks for coming on the show. Ed and I are super excited to talk to you about Goodman Games and third-party publishing and everything. And we can just launch right into it. Goodman Games obviously has a huge relationship with the third-party publishing community. And I've recently seen on your website that you're even bringing in Dungeon Crawl Classics, third-party publishers and everything to do things. Joey Royale's Fairhaven stuff and things like that are starting to show up on your website and everything. So I thought we'd go all the way back to the beginning and just ask kind of a philosophical question from you to get the ball rolling. You have this really great constructive relationship with third-party publishers. Where does that come from? What is the underlying philosophy that you have that leads to this flourishing of third-party publishing?
So I think this is going to be like a 20-minute answer that involves a little bit of a backstory. But everybody pre-show, Trevor and I just discovered a connection, and we got to share this connection. So I'm going to tell a little bit about my secret origin story, and then Trevor has props, and I brought props too. But
Okay.
When I was in, when I was in high school, my brother and I, we were 3.5 years apart. We played a lot of games. So we had a basement in our house, and we had some plywood tables, 4x8. So we made this giant 8x8 table of spray painted green plywood, and sawhorses. And we went down to the basement, and my mom thought we were doing weird stuff, but we were basically playing Warhammer 40,000, for hours on end.
So we're doing weird stuff.
Yeah, it was weird stuff. Yeah, exactly. Inhaling paint fumes in the basement.
That's right.
So we had our, had our D&D era, had our Space Hulk era, but we had our Warhammer 40,000 era that was, I don't know, a couple of years. And we both tended to, be creative and write a lot. So I just started, writing up all these rules, because I also would buy, it was so much cheaper to buy non-Games Workshop miniatures. So I had all these like other miniatures, and I make up rules for them. And so then mostly my mom was always telling me to do something with all that stuff you wrote. So I went to see what I could do with all the stuff that I wrote. Both me and my brother had written a bunch of rules and backgrounds, and like my little Space Marine chapter. I think it was the Salamanders. I don't remember. I was always Space Marines. He was always Orcs. So Trevor, show us what you brought, your props, because go for it. Yeah.
So let me lead into this. So
Yeah.
I was in England. I'm the son of an Air Force. My dad was in the Air Force, and so I'm a military brat. And I was in England in the 80s as Games Workshop launched Warhammer 40,000. So I was there in 86, 87, 88, 89, and I was a huge Warhammer 40,000 fan. And so these are fanzines from the early 90s, 90, 91, if I remember correctly, maybe 89. This is called Inquisitor magazine. It's a 40K forum. This is the compilation of issue 10, 11, 12. And the reason this was compiled was it had the original Titan rules for 40K. And these are massive resin Titans. Tim Derputis did this. And then I've got issue 14 and issue 15. And at the time that I was huge into Warhammer 40,000, I was in college at that moment. And my friend Joel Phillips, who does tons of art and everything for Tales of the Smoking Worm, he's done a lot of the covers and stuff. He and I were massive 40K fans. And Joel was one of the artists who wrote to Joseph Goodman for his...
Wait, don't get ahead. Don't get ahead. Wait, we haven't told that.
Yep. So this was
a pause there. We'll get to that.
Okay.
So
we'll pause.
Yeah. So speaking of Inquisitor, so Rogue Trader, the first 40K book, came out in, I want to say 87 or 89.
Yep.
Around
89.
there. 89. Okay. And I remember going to the game store. I had like $40 I got for Christmas or something, and deliberating over what to buy and seeing that Rogue Trader and decided like, this is cool, man. So I bought that. And that's how my brother and I just got sucked into Warhammer 40K. So I'd written all this stuff. And so my mom said, do something with it. So somehow I found out about Inquisitor. I think it must have been at Sword of the Phoenix, which was my local game store in Atlanta.
Yeah.
Which, by the way, I always thought that was the stupidest name until like 20 years later, I started reading Robert E. Howard. And I was like, oh, I finally get it, But Sword of the Phoenix was my local game store. And I think that's where I found Inquisitor. But I found Inquisitor and I was like, oh, man, this is amazing. This is where I can submit my stuff. So I wrote him a letter. I mean, I think it was actually a letter back then. This was pre-email. And anyway, their submission guidelines were very disappointing. They were not going to pay me anything and they were going to get all the rights. And I was like 17 or 16 or something, but I was like, this doesn't sound like a good deal. I remember thinking that. And then I went to this high school that had like a journalism program. So I had learned very basic layout. What was it called? This is before InDesign, before Quark Express,
So
PageMaker.
PageMaker, Aldous PageMaker. And,
Yes.
Yep. So I was using Aldous PageMaker at the time
Okay.
too.
Yeah. So I had PageMaker. My parents had bought me one of those like original Macs, the like one-piece Macs.
Yep.
Which was our like family computer. And I had typed all this stuff up and I had, basic layout skills and so on. And I was like, I could give all my stuff to this guy and get nothing in return. Or I was like, I could just do it myself. And I don't know if that was my mom's idea or my idea. But somehow that came about. And so honestly, it was Inquisitor that got me into self-publishing because I decided I'll do it myself.
Yeah.
So that is go ahead.
And I'm betting that you only came across Inquisitor because did you grow up in California?
No, actually in Georgia. It must have got to Georgia right? Somehow.
So yeah, because it was a California-based guy.
Yeah.
He had gotten the rights to do those big Titans for 40K and everything, but he was
the resin ones.
You almost couldn't find these, right? I mean, we had to mail order to him to get them.
Yeah, this was like before the internet. I must have found out about it either from the game store or I used to go to the Fantasy Fair, which was like the pre-Dragon Con con in Atlanta. And I remember running a lot of 40K and playing in 40K tournaments there. So maybe somebody there had it. I don't remember how I heard about it. But
I had email back then, and we used to play Blood Bowl via email.
So really? I didn't have email yet.
We put H's and numbers, and so I would get these things. It would be like my orc moves from H1 to L3, and he blitzes, right? And then he would do the rolls, and you just have to trust him. And he'd say, "And your elf falls over." And so,
I mean, that's awesome. That's nowadays it's so much easier, but that was very satisfying doing it that way.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun.
Yeah. So anyway, he I don't remember if he accepted it or not, but I had this decision to make of like, should I submit? I decided not to, and I was going to do it on my own. So that led to, I brought props because I actually happen to have these lying around, which is great. I have not undone this piece of tape in like 20 years, so it just broke. Anyway, this is the Dark Library #1. And crazily enough, Trevor and I have a connection here, which we'll talk about. But this is the first thing I ever published a long time ago. I think it has a date, autumn 1994. And I want to say that Inquisitor had like an ad in this one or maybe the next one. But yeah, I mean, this is where I used to draw. So I drew this. If you can see this, I spent a lot of time drawing with
awesome.
You guys know what rapidographs are? They're these super fine pins. I was a big fan of rapidographs, and I was actually halfway decent. Sorry?
They used to clog.
Yeah, they clogged all the time. You had like, Anyway, my brother and I wrote all the stuff in here, and we self-published this. I remember I found this local printer, like old school print shop, and negotiated to print 200 copies. And I still remember knowing a guy who knew a guy who heard about a guy who heard about a distributor. And so getting it, the Lion and the Unicorn, I think, some distributor based in this. Yep. Is that right? That's like,
I think it was. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because this was the era where War Games West was still in existence.
Yes.
And Zaki was doing a lot of warehousing and moving of stuff. He was moving Judges Guild Line at the time. Teagle Manor had been reprinted. This is, I mean, the internet existed on campuses, but it didn't exist anywhere else yet. It was, absolutely.
Yeah. So it was that summer of 93, would have been the summer after I graduated, that I did most of this, printed it, met this distributor guy at like a con, and slowly started. We actually printed it and made it and sold it. I guess, I don't know where I sold it. I guess I sold it online through internet forums. But what didn't happen was I got to college and I was looking for advertisers. And so I started mailing out copies. And I mailed a copy to a company called Heartbreaker Hobbies. Do you remember them?
I do. Yeah. It's been a long time since I've heard about them, but yeah.
Yeah, they were based in Pennsylvania. Strangely, their office was like 10 minutes from my college. And he was looking for somebody to edit a miniatures magazine that he was planning to release. And the person in question was named Bob Watts, who had been the president of Games Workshop US and the first employee ever of Grenadier way back when, because he had married I'm not going to get this right. He was somehow like the brother-in-law or son-in-law or something of the guy who founded Grenadier. He was like connected to that family, was their first employee, worked there for years, went to Games Workshop US, became the president of Games Workshop US, then started his own company. So he basically hired me to do his magazine. And then based on that, he did me so many favors. Bob Watts, if you're watching this, thank you so much. He did me so many favors, which is another story on its own. But he passed on to me a spirit of helping the next guy. There's always somebody who's learning something new and help the next guy. So the second issue went from being this is not an ice cream cone, by the way. This is the head of a Space Marine, which I drew. But
it's a Mark 6 Space Marine.
Yes, exactly. To this was the next issue where we got full color art. Stupid zoom filter. Hold on. And we got what's his name to this is actually a Games Workshop painter who agreed to paint our cover for us. We got full color. And actually, yeah, on the back, Armor Cast, which was Tim Do, what's his name's?
It's his company. Yeah.
Yeah. He agreed to take out an ad, and we got another ad from, remember there was this guy competing with him called Forge World?
Yep. And so I have that Eldar. That's the original.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So I used to buy those from him. Yeah.
Yeah.
Horrible castings, but
yeah,
really great models.
It was what you could get back then. But sorry. Anyway, this is actually issue number 4. Issue number 2, sorry, was this one. But anyway, this issue was basically made possible by Bob Watts. I didn't know this at the time, but the printer somehow agreed to print full color with me, and I didn't have to pay them for like 60 days. And I was like, great. Now I know that I'm an experienced adult. Bob put me on his line of credit, because they did not give a college kid with barely a job, a line of credit, Bob did me like all these favors. And then, there was an ad in the back for Heartbreaker Hobbies. He traded me an ad. Anyway, so I guess where I'm going with this is not my personal history, but back to your question, which was early on, I felt like I got burned by the way the system worked, where I wanted to produce stuff that was compatible with my favorite game at the time, which was Warhammer 40,000. And, they do own the game. But as a fan, it was not easy for me to do it. There's no real forum for me to do it. When I finally found a forum, they wanted me to give them the material and get nothing for it. It was just like a system that I didn't like. And I am what you might call lawful chaotic. You kind of got to follow some rules, but I also like a little bit of just, I don't know, creative anarchy. So I feel like there's just this aesthetic that I like of a lot, I don't know, just a certain amount of wild creativity. And I'd like DCCRPG to experience that. And I'd like people to be able to add their own stamp to it. And I, can't necessarily pay them to make it a Good Me Games publication, but I can create a system so that they can exhibit their own business prowess and creative skill and produce something and see if they can sell it. And I don't, I think that just, I don't know how to say it. It builds the overall ecosystem. It makes the forest a little more beautiful,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Years ago, when Doom, the video game, had come out, some guys came up with an editor to make your own Doom levels. And initially, the reaction inside id, the company that made Doom, was, oh, we gotta go after these guys and shut them down. Fortunately, someone in the company had enough sense to say, wait a minute, guys. The more that this kind of thing disseminates, that gives our product more breadth. That's going to just create more and more of a customer base. And so they ended up not taking any kind of action and then eventually kind of opened up to that kind of thing. And I think that a lot of companies, and this includes certainly publishing companies, don't recognize that if you constrain the creative energy of people who engage with your product, you're actually doing your product a disservice. You're actually cutting off some growth and some natural dissemination that it will have by virtue of people building upon it.
Yeah, I think you're probably right. There might be exceptions, but for something as open-ended as, a rule set that's basically a framework for role-playing fantasy, like there's so many places that can be taken. And to your point, even Doom, for example,
Yeah,
Yeah, when I got to college, have you guys ever heard of the video game? It's not even a video game, the computer game BOLO,
Yes.
No.
the little tank game. You know this,
Little
Trevor?
tank
How do you
game.
know?
Yeah.
How do you know BOLO?
Sorry, I just so I was not a big computer game player, but I had a lot of friends who played Bolo and stuff. So I've had weird background.
Did they play on the internet against other people, or just play like the local campuses?
No, I think they were just playing in the local campus. We were just playing at New Mexico State. So
Okay.
that's where I was situated. But
Does the name Hillbilly Bob mean anything to you?
yeah. But it's been a long time since I've heard it. So is that you?
Yes. Trevor, I am your father. No, so I was Hillbilly Bob. I was actually the world's best Bolo player for about a year.
Oh wow, that's awesome.
Yeah, so that's maybe why you sort of vaguely recall this name, but Bolo was the first internet capable real-time multiplayer action game. It was actually a dissertation by a Stanford computer science student, which is a whole different segue. But in high school and then in college, I spent way too much time playing Bolo, and it was reflected in my grades. But it was also reflected in my Bolo skill level, and I got quite good. And I think it was my junior year. This is like totally like anarchic, early computer game bulletin board systems where there was no formal rankings. You just kind of knew who was good. So I slowly, methodically picked off all the people who they all said were better than me. Black Lightning, Palp and Santa, all the guys. So anyway, yeah, so I became the best in the world. But my point is that was another example of an amazing, what I'll call organic game, because the guy who created it, really, frankly, it was what do they call it? Shareware. It was just free, and you could, there was no like lock on it. It was just like you could play all full functionality, and you could mail the guy $10 if you liked it, that kind of thing.
Right. It was basically pay what you want. And all that it would do is when you hit the info, it would pop up an address and say,
yes,
send me some money if you're happy with this.
Yeah. And so he had this, or he didn't make it. He made it in a way that somebody put together a map editor. There were a couple like supporting apps, and like there was this whole community that came out of it, of all, me included, of people who built their own maps and organized tournaments. Like when I was in college, I actually organized some in-person tournaments. So a bunch of people flew to my college and like crashed in our dorm rooms. We basically played Bolo nonstop for 72 hours. And then I visited 2 other colleges, one in Chicago, one in New Jersey, at different times to like crash with them and have little mini cons and stuff. And it was just like this community of creativity. We all just made our own maps and developed new strategies based on the maps. And I don't know, I guess, again, back to your question, something about like that sort of anarchic jungle of creativity has just always kind of appealed to me.
Yeah. And I do think that Ed's point is right, that it does. It it worked for Wizards of the Coast in the 3.0 era.
Yeah.
It worked for the Apple iPhone, right? Apple was not originally intending to let people put apps on their phone. They originally, if you remember, Steve Jobs came out and said, well, you could build websites that you can run on the phone, and that did not go over well. And then the next year they had an app. They had the first app, app developers conference and everything. So yeah, I think it's just wonderful, because it is all of the third-party publishers who publish, Dungeon Crawl Classics or Mutant Crawl Classics or Weird Frontiers products and everything. They're all just throwing their little piece in the, in the stew and checking it out. And as a matter of fact, I spend a lot of time building things for this too, and I often reach out to someone and say, you did this really well. Can I steal this little piece and just use it so I don't have to worry about it? And I always ask. But and I've never had anybody say no, you can't do that, and they've always been really just happy to get cited and for me to, and I always tell them that I'll reference the source material and let people know that there's more of this cool stuff out there. So
yeah, but it's funny to me that DCC has influenced, from what I can tell, a lot of the game design philosophy going on right now. Honestly, I don't necessarily. It's frankly impossible to monitor the game design field now. There's so much stuff being produced, but to the extent that I can pay attention, like it's amazing to me how many other games have adopted the core concept of the funnel. How many other games have adopted certain elements of DCC that I'm pretty sure I was the first person to ever do, from a rules perspective. It was grounded in certain fiction. But somebody once said to me, there's a game out there that basically fairly directly copied some of the stuff I did. And they asked me for my opinion on that. And I was like, it's not like I invented saving throws. There's lots of stuff in my game that came from somebody else, And so I think it's just part of this ongoing iterative cycle. And I'll probably circle back in some number of years. And I'm not announcing DCC 2.0, but my point is I may want to do some design at some point and go look at some game and say, oh man, that's pretty cool. I'm going to borrow their idea, and it's just part of this iterative process, that keeps pushing game design forward, and to your point, the creative field as well.
Yeah. Well, and DCC came out of Mechanic-wise came out of 3.0 and 3.5, and you can see that there are certain parts in your rule book where it's, things are not explained, right? But it's like, if you've played D&D, you understand what movement is, or but you've cut out that conversation, and when we get new players who've never played before, often I have to send them back to a 3rd edition rule book to see, if you really want to understand how this works, it'll be nicely explained there, but we could just explain it to you, So, and that's because there's a shorthand in there, so that you can get to the good parts, right? You just
exactly.
Well, and so you don't get bogged down in too many rules.
Yeah. Which
was the thing that drove me away eventually from 3.5 was it's just a rule for everything, and then that I'm not playing the game to drown in rules. I'm playing the game to play a game.
Yeah. And I think it's funny you touch on something, Trevor. So I want to talk about the Indie RPG Creator Summit, but before I get there, let me just say that my first idea for that whole thing was a DCC third-party publisher summit. That's where this whole thing, and I started emailing you guys 3 months ago about this, and I still have this half-baked idea that I don't know where it is, some con somewhere, like a physical con. I can't decide if it should be physical or online, but we have something that's essentially a half day of third-party publisher summit, kind of like you mentioned the app developer summit, because I do feel like just being together talking often has a very positive creative effect. And there's something to that, so I guess I'm just throwing this out there. If anybody has ideas on how to execute this or whatever, I think it'd be cool. It may be a day. Well, Gen Con are all exhausted. I was going to say a day after Gen Con, but maybe a day after Game Horror.
Well,
or the day before
Gen Con, you're busy. At least
usually we're setting up until like 8 p.m. at night. But maybe it's not Gen Con. Maybe it's something else. I don't know. But I feel like there's a possibility that would be cool of some invitation where existing and prospective or aspiring third-party creators could somehow come together and just talk. And we have maybe workshops on specific topics. But I really feel like there's a lot of just creative juices that get flowing when we all communicate.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think I mentioned to you that I've for 2 years now, I've run a introduction to third-party publishing, independent publishing workshop at Gen Con, usually limited to 10 to 12 to 15 people, somewhere between 10 and 15. And I have to tell you, I've made it longer every time. I think it'll be 6 hours here in 2024, but man, I leave those conversations just jazzed. It's like, there's a whole bunch of people in the room who have never published something before, but they all have ideas, and they're at various stages in that process. And we just sit down at the table, and I've got a very small PowerPoint to kind of guide me along, but it's very loose and open-ended and talky, which is like, here's my experience. This is what it's like. And people freeform ask questions. We'll stop and go off on a tangent and then come back and everything. And it is you leave and everyone's just like super excited to go do work. And
that's awesome.
So yeah, it is before I do them, I'm always like, I gotta give a 6-hour lecture. But when I'm done, I feel absolutely great. And so, and if you sit down and get going, you realize that it's going to be a great conversation, and we're going to have a good time. And I just like to see those creative people, figure it out. And I get emails back all the time from them saying, this was exactly what I needed. These 2 or 3 pieces of information is what I've been looking for, and nobody talks about it. But because it's a nice closed session, we can talk frankly about, pricing, about how you budget, about, if you're looking to make profit, which is not a dirty word, if you're, how to do everything fairly and be, and have a good work ethic and everything, but still, do your best work.
Yeah.
That's a great thing. I think it'd be wonderful for the third party, for the DCC community to be able to do that. It'd be good to poll and see which convention. I'm not sure if it's GaryCon or Gen Con. I don't think it's Origins that you get more of the creative showing up too.
Yeah. There's
so-
that, and which convention has the most bandwidth, because most
Yeah.
people who go to Gen Con are already booked solid for 4 days. Gary Con's kind of the same. I think it almost has to be a con where there isn't
maybe
as much going on, or it's like maybe a 3-day con, so there's room to tack on an extra day because you're not already committed to 4 days, or I don't know,
Yes, yeah,
something like that.
Because I mean, I always leave those 4-day cons tired.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah. No, I think that's a great idea. I think we should work on it.
Yeah.
That sounds like that'd be a lot of fun.
Yeah, you're actually making me think. Game Hole, that's 3 days, I want to say. I feel like it's, of the major cons, it's the one
It's a
that's not.
4-day con. It's Thursday, Friday,
it?
Saturday, but it
Oh, it is?
doesn't
Okay.
feel like 4 days. That's the weird thing. Is
Yeah, I was there and I was like, it didn't feel like 4 days. Why didn't it feel like 4 days?
Like 4 days. And they've got, I don't know. It feels, for some reason, Game Hole feels lighter. I don't know what it is about it. I don't know if it's the venue and how they have everything structured, but it feels more like, I feel like I have more breathing room there to do, to talk to people and everything. I don't feel like I have that at GaryCon.
Yeah.
GaryCon always feels very, and maybe it's because GaryCon is kind of the first big con of the season. People are often really intense.
Yeah, that could be it. Yeah.
You know?
Actually, somebody said to me about Game Hold that it's like, it's the last con of the season. Everybody's just like over it. It's much more relaxed,
Much
like
more relaxed.
that could be it. Yeah. Interesting.
Yep.
Yeah.
So I want to take a few minutes to talk about, for the benefit of especially prospective third-party publishers who haven't put forth their first submission yet, and I wanted to talk about, what does Goodman Games look for when receiving third-party submissions in terms of what type of product, what quality indicators do you look for, so that people perhaps have something that they feel like that they've got a target that they're aiming for?
Great question. First, I'm going to do technical clarifications of terms, just in case
Sure.
there's confusion out there. But in the olden days, companies would accept submissions, which meant like I submitted stuff to companies. You would mail them your manuscript and say, "Dear company, will you please publish this? And you'll pay me 3 cents a word, and send me 2 copies for free." And I think that model is slowly fading, because Kickstarter and Drive-Thru RPG and Lulu just make it so much easier to get your own stuff out there if you can find a layout buddy and an art buddy and so on. But there are companies that still do that. And actually, for Goodman Games, we may just open up submissions soon, because I do want to allow people to submit. But I think that model is slowly fading. But just to say it, when you say submissions, I think that's not what you mean.
Right.
What you mean more is if a creator, a writer, or an artist, or a pair makes their own product and wants to print it, distribute it on their own. That's more what you mean, right?
Yeah, because there is a step in the process whereby you have to submit the product to Goodman Games for approval for third-party publication. It's not being published by Goodman Games, but among other things, I'm sure part of that is to make sure that it doesn't reflect negatively on the brand. But whatever other characteristics go into that, if you could give us kind of a quick sense of what are those things that you look at when those submissions come in, in order for them to get the blessing of getting that compatibility logo.
Yeah. Sorry, I got to say one more thing too. What's interesting to me too is why companies have third-party licenses. Nowadays, all the RPGs have one. When I did it, I believe Goodman Games was the third to do this. Wizards of the Coast had a open gaming license and a separate D20 license in the 3rd edition era. As they moved into 4th edition, it was called the GSL, which is a whole separate thing. But in that era, Paizo also offered their own license around the same time as 4th edition. And when Goodman Games offered ours, it would have been 1 or 2 years after Paizo offered theirs, I want to say. And I believe at that point, the only people doing this were Goodman Games, Paizo, and Wizards of the Coast, I guess in reverse order. And I did it for a couple of reasons. And you have to look back at the original goals of the parties that did that originally. Wizards had a very specific strategic goal, which is they wanted market share for their rule system. When they published D&D 3rd edition, that was when the market was heavily fractured. There were, 100 RPG systems? Yet suddenly, Call of Cthulhu published a D20 edition. Star Wars published a D20 edition. You had the marketplace moving to their rule system, and they really did succeed in their goal of that open game license. Then you had Paizo, which had a similar goal, which was they wanted market share for what was effectively a variant on the other market share goal, which was their Pathfinder version of third edition. So when I did it way back then, what I wanted was a lot more supplemental support for the game. The idea was not so much market share for a rule system, but supplement, so that people about the core rulebook felt like they had additional things that they could use it with, kind of like the levels in Doom you referenced earlier, Ed, just other ways to play DCC RPG. That was the goal, was to facilitate and encourage creativity among creators. And there were already people early on, like the Reverend Dak J. Ultimac, who some of you guys know. He was there for the very beginning. He played a play test with me in Southern California at whatever mini-con that was. And his photos in the book, I think, if I remember early on from that game. And he had all these great ideas. And I was like, do it, man, just do it. And so he had a copy of the license before the game was even published. But that was the goal, to get this creative field out there. Nowadays, many years later, and this was before Kickstarter, by the way, these were people who were hand stapling zines. There was no platform like Kickstarter to create stuff out of the blue. So many years later, now there's other publishers that have their version of the license. And in many cases, it's different in certain ways. From what I've been told, I haven't read them all, but there's less of a requirement on approval. That's actually a foreign element to a lot of people. And they do it for different I don't want to put words in people's mouths. They probably have all very good reasons, but they do it slightly differently. But the reason I put that original approval clause in there was because this was pre-Kickstarter, pre a lot of what we have now. And I wanted to make sure that what was coming out would be, and I say appropriate. I mostly mean appropriate from like a parental standards perspective. I want the game to be family friendly. So you can actually show nudity. And I mean, first of all, the game talks about human sacrifice. So let's just be clear. Human sacrifice is totally cool. It's like, it's other stuff that I'm not cool with. So I just wanted to be like, if my kids picked it up and flipped through it, they're not like, oh, what's that? Pointing at, inappropriate pictures. So the main reason that standard is in there is so I could tell people, look, man, what you're doing is fine, but you need to put a parental advisory label on it, and say like, hey, this is not family friendly. So there have been a handful of products that have come out over the years that actually have a parental advisory label, because there are people who want to put, certain pictures or whatever. There's only one product that I've ever rejected. That's a long story, but a handful of times I've said basically add a parental advisory label, or a handful of times we had like multiple submissions at the same time, especially early on, where like 3 people were doing drowning rules. And I was like, can you talk to so-and-so? It's just weird that, maybe you guys can collaborate on the same rules, that kind of thing. But mostly what I encourage is just unbridled creativity. Come up with something cool and new. That's the goal. That makes other people say, man, this is pretty cool. I think I want to play this, and I got to go buy the DCC rulebook to do that. And it sort of builds the overall community. That's the main goal.
All right. So, Trevor, want to move into the distributor service?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm just looking at the show notes and I'm thinking we just buttoned that one up really good.
Okay.
All right.
Indeed.
So, check, we're done. So one of the exciting announcements that Goodman Games put out within the last month or two is, actually just after Gen Con, is that you have bought or are renting, but now have a warehouse, right? And so part of that is you're beginning to offer kind of distribution services and things like this, which sounds like a great potential source of getting third-party publishing products kind of out there into bigger distribution. Can you talk about that a little bit, or tell us what your goals are with this? First of all, with buying a warehouse, with getting some warehouse space, and setting yourself up there in Indiana, and then what are your thoughts, and how are you going to bring third-party publishers underneath that, and what are your goals with it?
Yeah, great question. So it's funny how people come into the industry at different eras and learn different things. So I came in an era where the only way to sell products at any kind of scale was to find a distributor and sell to stores. So that's what I learned. I also had day jobs for many years that involved, for the most part, being in corporate retail, sort of managing retail chains in various roles. So that's very intuitive and natural to me. I think people coming in now learn about Kickstarter and to some extent, drive-through RPG and digital publishing. And that stuff's easy because you create an account, then you upload your files, you click go, get an approval maybe from, Kickstarter or drive-through. After a while, you don't even need approval anymore because you're auto-approved, and you can just go, and because of the way it works, I don't want to oversimplify it, but people have come to accept that and view it as that's what the industry is. And I guess I'm fortunate enough that I learned other, that is, in my opinion, not what the industry is. The industry is game stores. Sorry, I freaking love game stores. Sorry, Elena, censor me. I love game stores. I just always love game stores. Yeah. And, the game stores that I like typically are not the most financially successful because I like the ones with old dusty catacombs full of like cool stuff in the back, and what sells is like magic cards, Pokemon cards, D&D, so you got to have that in the front. But there's a certain subset of game stores that just I've always appreciated. And, honestly, antique stores that focus on like military collectibles. Not that I was never in the military, but I love those like racks of weird patches and, funky canteens. There's actually this is totally random. There's an Army Navy store down in a couple, like at 2 hours south here in San Jose, that has a gas mask section, and it always cracks me up. I've never been to any other store that has a gas mask section.
A whole section, right? A department.
Yeah, they got like the Israeli gas masks and the like German gas masks and the like British gas masks and like, but it's just like such a like. I love stores that have that quirkiness and uniqueness, and the guy clearly is really into gas masks. And it's like the only store in the world that has a gas mask section. So like, I love game stores that have that dusty tome section of like old zines or random British this, that, or the other, or whatever. So that stuff just, I've always loved that.
The old box games of Napoleon 1812 or whatever. It's
right.
Always some super specific war game thing in a box.
Yeah. And the way you get your products into those stores is distributors. And so that's what I learned early on. That was the way I did it. So to me, that is an element that will always be there. There will always be game stores, and I want to get my products into game stores. You don't necessarily make as much money per unit, but one unit sitting on a game store shelf can prompt many purchases as people go by, pick it up, flip it open, and say, I got to check this out. I'll go to their website, stuff like that. So that's a service that to me is very intuitive, and I've been working with distributors for 2 decades, and so it's natural and easy, and I know how to do it. But a lot of people don't know how to do it because they're new and they don't have the connections and don't know where to go. You have to go to certain trade shows or call certain people. There's not an FAQ like on Kickstarter and you click the green button to start. So what I've been able to do is make that work for Goodman Games. One of the facts I tell people, Kickstarters or crowdfunding is our number one source of revenue, but crowdfunding only makes up 8% of the units we sell. Or said differently, we sell 12 times as much stuff into non-crowdfunding channels because we sell a lot of stuff to distribution, and distribution's a broad net, far beyond what you see happen on Kickstarter. So I'd like to be able to offer that ability to other people. And the way distribution is a business of scale, they run on thin margins. So quick lesson, if a consumer pays 10, that means a retailer pays $5. That means their distributor paid $4. So you make much less overall. The distributor has to run their entire business off buying it for $4 and selling it for $5. So they run on very narrow margins. So the thing that makes them profitable and lets them succeed is essentially scale and efficiency. So for me as a publisher, if I offer 10 SKUs or 20 SKUs, it's far less efficient for the distributor than if I offer 200 SKUs. Because there's certain costs to them to write purchase orders and to process purchase orders and to handle invoices and to receive an inventory and to shelve the stock. All those expenses that are more or less fixed are much more easily amortized over large purchases. So for me, it actually offers advantages for my interactions with distributors to offer more SKUs. And for a third-party publisher who has 5 or 10 or maybe 15 SKUs, they are much more likely to get picked up by a distributor. If the distributor is already ordering $1,000 for the Goodman Game stock, it can throw in $20 of their stuff. Versus the distributor has to wait until they have a $500 order for that third-party publisher, which might take 6 or 9 months to accrue. So that was a really long-winded answer, but the point is, I think I can help get a lot of additional DCC support into stores in a way that makes it more efficient for the distributors. They certainly would like it, and it offers something to publishers they might not be able to get to easily otherwise.
So that makes perfect sense to Ed and I, who have been talking about it for a couple of months and everything.
Yeah.
It is, but let me just give a summary to see if I've got it right. Kickstarter and direct funding sources are a very small margin of the total population of people we get impact with our product. Distribution represents the vast majority of that potential impact, and so it provides you with a much larger pipeline, but at smaller individual sale revenue.
Yes.
And everything. So you're gonna, but it's gonna be offset by hopefully it's offset by volume. That's the difference.
Exactly. Yeah. And I don't think anybody should do just one or just the other. But if
Yeah.
you're already on Kickstarter selling 500 copies of your game or 1,000 copies of your game, you can almost always then produce a few incremental copies at a much lower unit cost, and it makes sense to sell those to distribution. I
And
mean, go ahead. Sorry.
I think that's a critical point, actually. So if we could dwell on that for just a
Yeah.
minute. One of the things, if you talk to printers and print shops for all the, because let's just step back and remind our viewers, we're talking to third-party publishers or people who want to become third-party publishers. That's the focus of the Scrivenery. And for those of you who have never queried a printer, if you ask for, as a matter of fact, when I run my workshop, I ask my students to do this. We get on Mixam and we say, I want you to work up this book that and I have them bring their favorite game book. And I say, I want you to go through and work out the art costs and everything, work up the page count, go to Mixam and price that out and tell me how much it costs to print 1 and print 100 and then print 2,000 and then print 5,000.
Yes.
And notice how that cost per unit sale goes way down once you get past 2,000. But then on the flip side of that, you have to move that product. If you invest all that money and then never move the product because you only really oversold 200, then you're stuck with a whole bunch of warehousing costs and everything that are useless, right? I mean, you're never going to make any money off that. So this is, could we talk to that issue for just a minute?
Yeah, that's a great point. It's also worth noting that digital printing, which is a major innovation. When I first got started, you couldn't print one copy. Like the minimum, I think, was 200. So it must have been 200. Like the reason I printed 200 copies of this is because that's the minimum I could print. Nowadays, you can now print one copy. So digital printing in some ways is amazing because it facilitates creators being able to do very small runs. But those small runs have much higher unit costs, the cost of each unit. So if you're doing those print runs that involve anything off Lulu or drive-through, it's just fixed costs. You basically pay, I'm making this up, but X dollars per copy, whether you print 1 or 50 or 100. There might be a freight charge, which gets a little more efficient over time, but you're not getting significant savings in the printing cost. If you use what is called offset printing or web press printing, basically any traditional printer. I work with Walsworth and Regent, which are two well-known. There's many of them out there. Exactly to your point, Trevor, if you print 100 copies, you might be looking at $10 per copy. If you print 500 copies, it's probably going to drop to $5 a copy. Once you're up to 1,000, you might be looking at $2 a copy. So there's a huge advantage to you run your crowdfunding, you sell 500 copies, but then to your point, you figure how many more can you sell through your online store, through cons, through distribution, and then you print more, and that unit cost goes way down. And that way you can afford to sell. For the Kickstarter, you sell them at full cover price. For distribution, you sell them at a discount of some kind, and you still make money off those units.
Yeah, and the goal, from my perspective, when I do that, is to have the Kickstarter pay all the creatives, everything that went into production, and pay the print cost of the higher volume run, and then you're at least you've paid off the investment, as much as you can, right? And so. Just as a note for everybody out there, when you get on Mixam, and I know we talk about Mixam a lot, I use it as a primary printer, but when you change through that volume setting, you will notice that underneath the price total is a printer that is it'll start out with like an HB Indigo, which is a type of digital printer machine, right? And it'll often change once you get above a certain volume to offset printing. And it'll make a note so that you as the buyer are aware that you have just gone over the threshold from digital printing to traditional offset printing, which is a completely different printing format. It's a different between high chroma ink, inkjet printing, and actual traditional printer's ink, and what Joseph said was web printing, which is huge rolls of paper that are true signatures of 16 up. Those sheets may be 26 by 40 or larger, depending on the size of your book. I mean, I'm thinking that the Judges Guild books you did, that had to be the maximum or close to the maximum size.
Actually, it was 4-page signatures, which is,
and
if you know what that means, it's insane.
It's insane. Yeah. But normally that would have been a 16-page signature for an 8.5 by 11 page. So there is economy of scale there, and you can actually see you go from digital printing to offset. And at that point, Mixam's telling you it is now cheaper to do an offset print run.
Yeah.
Even though there's a setup, they've got a hidden setup fee built into that.
Yeah.
Whereas on a digital printer, they're literally, it's like a photocopier. They just say, there's a piece of software they can pull your PDF in, they'll lay it out for you, and they'll just hit print. And that's it.
Yeah.
And it'll build the whole thing.
Hey, Trevor,
And
we
if
have
you're-
a question in the chat. Someone wants if you can provide information about Mixam, like their URL or something to that effect of how they can look it up.
mixam.com, mixam.com. And there are many of these. There's several. There's about 6 really good. Is it Print Ninja is another one. Lulu is one, which will also do most of the print types that Mixam will do. These are small. They're meant for actually the type of things that I produce, like zines and everything. So that's most of the zine architecture that you're seeing is coming out of those type of print shops right now.
Yeah.
Let me pose a question to you that might be something that would be on the mind of people who are intrigued by the distribution notion. They want to, and maybe they're already dabbling, maybe they're already doing digital printing, maybe they're already doing small scale stuff, and maybe and so thinking, well, so what would be involved for me to make that leap? What do I have to do differently? What additional work do I have to do? What kind of additional investments do I have to make, etc. For the third party publisher who's been small scale so far, what additional time / effort / investment is required to go down that road?
Yeah, good question. So first of all, at the Indie RPG Creator Summit, we're actually going to have a couple sessions covering this. For one of them, some of the most influential people in the distribution business have been kind enough to agree to appear. So we'll actually have Michael Parker from ACD Distribution, who is the lead buyer there. He will actually be in one of the sessions, along with Mike Pastel, who is from PhD Distribution, and Scott Bohr from GTS. These are all people whose job is to buy RPGs for a living and then resell them to retailers. So they'll be in that conversation and be able to give you their insights as distributors and buyers for distributors, what they look for and what you need to do. So that'll be amazing. These are people who normally you can, these are the connections that are great, and you normally would only be able to talk to them if you happen to know them ahead of time and found them at Gen Con or set up a meeting with them at the Game Expo or things like that. In broad terms, Ed, I'm going to answer in broad terms because you can spend hours on this.
Sure.
One of the biggest differences is what's called the solicitation process. Let me grab a prop here real quick. If you guys have ever heard of local game store, probably has Game Trade Magazine or Meeple Monthly. These are published by Alliance Game Distribution or ACD Games. And these are publications that are essentially small catalogs that list all the items coming out in a future month. So a solicitation is where a publisher would send information to the distributor, cover art, back cover blurb, price, ISBN, SKU, and say, hey, here's my product. It's coming out in April. And then they would print this issue that has all the April releases. The stores go through it and say, hey, this looks pretty cool. Order me 1 of this and 2 of that and 3 of that. But for distributors to do their work efficiently, they want to have all this information in their system and have feedback from the retailers. So they have a sense of, oh, I'm going to sell 100 of this or I'm going to sell 1,000 of that. So one of the biggest differences is you have to provide this information to distributors 4 months before release. So unlike Kickstarter, where you hit go and then immediately engage with distributors, you're often providing the information 4 months ahead of time. With the book trade, if you're dealing with major book chains, it's 9 months ahead of time. So one thing is just planning ahead. That makes a big difference with distributors. They don't want to have to constantly change the information because you change your page count and change your price. That's not something they want to deal with. Another thing is the margins, which we discussed. You have to sort out terms, old school terms. So you're going to offer a 58 discount or a 60 discount. At what threshold do you offer free freight? Things like that. That's where, frankly, it becomes easier to just partner with Goodman Games or there are other companies that do it too, because we're going to have sorted all that out ahead of time. And then the last thing is I'd call it the quantities. I think people are used to ordering on Kickstarter, or I think running a Kickstarter, you get 400 backers, you print 450 and you walk away. With distribution, you don't really know how many you're going to sell. It could be a lot, it could be a little. We actually, for Goodman Games, we just signed a new deal with Diamond Book Distributors, which is a very major player. And actually, I just signed a printer quote, and on Monday we're sending the files for the next printing of DCC RPG, and I'm doing an entire print run just to accommodate the first purchase order from Diamond, which was enormous. and then we'll do a second print run shortly thereafter with a second printer to get coverage for what I suspect will be the second and third print run, or sorry, second and third purchase orders. So, you can potentially sell hundreds or thousands of copies in a swoop if things go well. So you could potentially, if your Kickstarter sold X, you might be selling 2X by the time you're a year later and have name recognition. And a lot of it depends on the retailers deciding to restock. Really, distributors are middlemen. They pass it on to the retailers who put it in front of consumers. So the consumer has to see this off the shelf and say, that looks pretty cool, I'm going to buy one. The retailer has to say, oh man, that's sold, I guess I'll buy another one from my distributor. Then the distributor has to say, wow, I sold 12 of those just last week. I guess I need to restock another 200 to cover me for next month, or whatever that might be. And you got to get that cycle going where everybody has confidence in the product and is willing to stock it again. That was long-winded. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. I think that the primary thing that people need to get their head around is I guess one being the scale that you're thinking of is just radically different. But also then, as you're talking about the process, the time frame involved and so forth, and the layers that are involved, and I know you mentioned it, but I want to reinforce for people to understand. You have to have an arrangement where your print cost is down to a point where you can afford to sell these at, say for example, 25% of MSRP.
Actually, great point, Ed. Let me just give a number. In general, you want to be able to make a profit selling it 70% off the MSRP or 30% of the MSRP. Distributors want to buy it 60 off. And then to the extent that you're working with some sort of, it's called a consolidator or fulfillment house, which would be Goodman Games, or there's others out there. Studio 2 does this. I always recommend them. They're good at it. And there's others as well. Again, there's different models. Some do it on consignment and take a cut of your sales as they happen. Others, what I'm offering DCC publishers is I will just buy inventory straight up at 70 off and then sell it. There's different ways to do it, but it always works out to 67, 68, 69, 70 off, somewhere in that range. So you have to be able to make money at that level.
And so the role that Goodman Games will play in this is being the connecting point between the third-party publisher and the distributor.
Exactly. We will stock the product in our warehouse in Indiana. As you mentioned, Trevor, we opened this 4 or 5 months ago, partly for things like this. We actually just signed the lease on a second unit next door because we need more space. We have more products. Stuff just keeps coming in. Plus, Dark Tower is huge. Let me show you this. So, like, these are the slipcases
4.5,
for
5
Dark Tower.
inches thick, right? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So I was looking at this thinking, like, man,
crikey.
1,000 units of this is a lot bigger than 1,000 units of like a skinny module. I was like, I need another second unit. I need more space. So we just signed a lease on an adjacent unit. But yeah, to your point, the basic concept is that we will be able to, you as a publisher would ship your stuff to our warehouse. We would then go to distributors with advance notice and say, hey, we have this stuff we're now soliciting. 3 months later. And actually, I'm way behind on email for the public at large. Sorry, Andrea, Martin, actually Ed, Trevor. I owe you all answers on different things. James Posnell, sorry, I will get back to you on that Purple Planet stuff. So it's like, any day now I'm going to catch up on email. But some of the stuff I owe answers to for a number of publishers is those that we've talked to about this is specifics on the ordering process. Again, I'm going to dive into way too much detail, but distributors like predictability and reliability and stability. They are fundamentally creatures of order, and the more, logistics, everything is cheaper in the world of logistics if you have order, structure, and predictability. So what I'm working on right now, one of the projects that will assist me and basically answer a lot of the questions from some of the distribution partners I have, both publishers and distributors, is it needs to be a calendar for next year, which I'm working on, which essentially says for every week of the year, this is the week we send out solicitations. The next week, that's the week we issue what's called a call to order. So, hey, distributors, this stuff just landed in the warehouse. You can now order it. 2 weeks later, after the POs have rolled in, we ship all the stuff that was ordered. Then next month, repeat. And then you work around Gen Con, you work around Black Friday, you work around Christmas. Those are the 3 major ones that kind of screw up the system. But that way, I will be able to get back to you guys and get back to Martin and Andrea from Gang Yonners. I owe you an answer, and several others, and be able to say, like, okay, here's the schedule. If you ship me your stuff by this day, that's the cutoff. And it goes into this month's releases. Otherwise, it rolls forward to next month. And that's what distributors like, because that way they have an orderly, structured way to say, okay, I'm going to get all the stuff that Goodman Games has to offer on one PO, saves me some money, makes things more efficient. And then next month we'll catch the next wave of releases, that kind of thing.
So if somebody wants to look into this arrangement, what's their first step in terms of contacting Goodman Games about this?
Great call. For right now, just email info@goodman-games.com. What I want to do probably after the Indie RPG Creator Summit is I'll probably create a little, we have a great FAQ on the website actually for third-party publishers. Let me drop that in the chat actually. It's very helpful. We pulled it together actually by polling a lot of third-party publishers on what are the things we should be more clear about. And you guys provided some great input actually. So by the time we get to maybe February-ish, I'm hoping to have this be just a lot more, public links that people can go to get information on. We're just not there yet. So for now, just email us, and then over time, we will make this a little more easy to get access to.
Great.
So we'll post this this link that Joseph's about to send us, and then to become a third-party publisher, as Ed and I have talked about in the past, there is a license, and Joseph spoke to that earlier in the show. And then to move into distribution relationship with Goodman Games, there's a further license. Is that correct?
Yeah. Yes.
That's how it's looking right now.
Yeah. And just getting technical, the secondary agreement isn't a license so much as just a contract. Basically, I buy inventory and resell it. But yeah.
But the wonderful thing about both of those documents is, in and of themselves, they contain a lot of the questions you're going to have, the answers to a lot of the questions you're going to have about how things work and stuff, just to get you going. And then you can always follow up at info@goodmangames.com.
Yes, and actually, Levi, I owe you an answer as well on your DCC Day submission, and Stefan, I owe you an answer as well. I see the emails come through and never get to them, but once we have an arrangement worked out for distribution, I want to open up DCC Day to third-party publishers as well. So for those of you who don't know, I created Free RPG Day a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. So me and my friend Aldo cooked that up. It's a long story. I'll tell that story someday if you want to hear it. But DCC Day is my version of doing Free RPG Day specific to the DCC community. And I want to open it up to third-party publishers. So we now have over 150 stories every year that participate in DCC Day, which is amazing. And I think it's time, we're going into year 5, if I remember correctly. And I think it's time to make that something that third parties can participate in, because there's lots of gamers who are going to the stores saying, hey, Mr. Game Store owner, or Ms. Game Store owner, we want to come to your store, pick up the freebies, pay you for the exclusives, and I'd like to have the ability for that creative flourishing to happen with DCC Day as well. So that's something, again, probably this next year we won't make it like a public website post because it's kind of the experimental year to get everything worked out. But the following year, it might just become a standard thing where you can submit your products for inclusion in DCC Day.
So one quick question that I've been asked to squeeze in before we move on. Someone was curious as to how you settled on the Triceratops logo.
Another old story.
Yeah. First of all, technically it's a rhinoceratops, not a triceratops.
Okay.
You'll see along the frill, there's little bitty bumpy knobs, which are technically additional horns. Duh. And
Come on, dinosaur lovers.
Yeah, exactly. And her name is Rhonda. She is Rhonda the Rhinoceratops, and this is kind of a random story. That was our second logo. If you go back to the very early days, you'll see a different logo that was a cowboy riding a dinosaur and trying to last. Yeah, exactly. That's a long story. My friend Derek drew that one. But I was walking by a shop in sorry, Hagar. I was walking by a shop in San Francisco where I lived 20 years ago, and it was a what is the word? Prosthetologist. It was a guy who carved body parts. Like if you lost your arm and the doctor was gonna like attach a fake arm, this guy's
make a special prosthesis for you.
Yeah, it's like a sculptor, but like that's his thing. He carved your fake arms. In his spare time, he carved dinosaur heads. So I walked by this like store. Again, I like weird stores. I walked by this storefront and I was like, it's like filled with dinosaur heads, and it's like Joe Smith, prosthetic surgeon or prosthetic sculptor or whatever. So I walked in and he had this sculpture of a rhinoceratops. If you go back to find photos of the Gamma trade show from 2001, 2002, the first one I exhibited at, I basically told the guy, I was like, look, man, if I give you $500, can I take your dinosaur head to a trade show and we work something out? And so I took his dinosaur head to a trade. So my first booth as Goodman Games was like a 10 by 10 in like the Entrepreneur's Alley or whatever they called it in the back of the Gamma trade show with like my one book and a freaking huge dinosaur head. And then me
How
and my
big are we
wife,
talking here?
I mean, it was big. I want to say like, 3 or 4 feet across by like.
So it's like
3 or 4
life
feet.
size.
Yeah.
I mean, I've never met a rhinoceratops. I can't testify to that. But
I'll speak to it personally from my own experience. That's
Okay.
life size.
Yeah, it was pretty big. It was not some like little thing. So the goal was to get attention. It got attention. People were like, "What's up with the dinosaur, man?" So that's how I met a lot of people. I was at where was it? Was it PAX Unplugged? And I ran into Dave Salisbury, who's, if you know the British gaming scene, he owns Fanboy 3 and has been around forever. But he was telling me he still remembers, he was there at that booth and still remembers that first booth. But anyway, it's Rhonda the Rhinoceratops. She is our second logo, inspired by the dinosaur head that I talked a guy into loaning me on the streets of San Francisco. And later on, I guess Will McCausland painted that. I feel like maybe I gave him a photo or something. I don't remember where we specifically came up with that image, but William McCausland made it come to life. And that is Rhonda.
That's awesome.
I'm saying we need a monster named Rhonda now.
Yeah, T-Sats.
Yeah.
I expect that in your next MCC adventure.
Someone else mentions the Dino Necromancer. Good stuff.
Yes. Yeah.
So we're actually quickly running out of time, unfortunately.
Sorry.
But we do have one last major topic to cover.
Yeah.
And that would be the Indie Publishing Summit, which we mentioned early on, but we're gonna circle back around to it. Could you tell us what the Indie Publishing Summit is? People, if you're on Facebook, you've started seeing ads for it and things like this. I know myself and Nick Barron and everybody, several people have put out, who are involved, have put out notes saying, hey, this is upcoming and stuff. So what is the Indie Publishing Summit? What can people hope to expect from it? And what do you think, what's the different levels of participation and everything?
Yeah, great question. So this started when I realized earlier this year that DCC RPG is, I believe, the second most popular tabletop role-playing game system on Kickstarter. We have a page on our website where we're happy to support them. So whenever somebody tells us, hey, I'm running a Kickstarter for DCC or MCC or XCC or whatever, or stamps. So like Tom from WeirdWorks just ran some cool compatible stamps with art by Doug and Stefan. Anything in that universe, we're happy to help promote it on our website and our social and so on. And we started keeping a log of like all the ones we promoted. And then at some point we realized, holy smokes, it's been like, I mean, at this point, it's like 170, 180 Kickstarters related to DCC. And I was like, my goodness, there's a vast audience out there of people creating and then, playing these products. So I slowly came to realize how many people, I mean, I kind of knew it. There's so many people doing it. And we get an endless stream of questions, which is partly why we created that publisher hub for the FAQ. But this led to this conversation about how do we provide more support for this group of people and, have a more living workshopping format. And honestly, our Goodman Games Kickstarters have gotten a lot stronger in the last 2 years due to certain things we learned and we did. And it was how do we pass on this knowledge? And then actually, Trevor and Ed, it was you guys I started pinging because you guys have the Scrivenery. And I was like, how can we leverage some of what you're doing and your learnings and so on and make this, share this knowledge. So that it evolved and it went from being a DCC summit to a DCC and Indie summit to just being the Indie RPG Creator Summit. Because I think a lot of people can benefit from the learnings. But what it is 3 days of Zoom webinars in the time frame of the second week of January. And there are 8, 9, or 10 hours of coverage every day and essentially mostly 1 hour blocks of all sorts of topics that will make you as an indie RPG publisher more skilled at what you do. Days 1 and 2 are free and they focus primarily on what I'll call the publishing components. So we assume you already have an idea or even a product created. We're not going to teach you game design. That's not the goal. You already did your game design. You already maybe did your writing. What we're going to cover is from that point forward. So things like how do you work with artists? How do you do graphic design and layout? How do you manage a creative team of, the first time you had to hire a writer or hire multiple writers? How do you create adventures to supplement your setting or your rules system? How do you work with, we have one called Fundamentals of Print Production, to what you were saying, Trevor. How do you work with a printer? Days 1 and 2 are all these topics that are about sort of putting together your product, as well as what I call secret origin stories, which are stories from publishers about how they got where they were. We have Rob Schwab appearing. for those of you who don't know, Rob is, for many people, he's living the dream. He makes a full-time living as an RPG author / creator / publisher. And he got there through years of freelancing and then creating his own mini setting / rules, Shadow of the Demon Lord, if I remember the title correctly. Raised quite a bit of money on Kickstarter, and now is at the point where he doesn't necessarily have to participate in the grind anymore. And he was telling me he's doing more sort of free-form type games, just for the fun of it. But he's going to tell his story about how he got there. Clint Bohati, who some of you guys know from the DCC zine side, he started doing DCC zines before Kickstarter was a thing. This is like 2013, 2014. He did several. They were quite good. And they started him on a path to doing several board games, but his own particular board game, Necro Molds, which is kind of like Play-Doh meets Warhammer meets Necromunda, I guess. It's awesome. It involves Play-Doh. Like, you can't go wrong with it.
Absolutely.
But he raised $500,000 on Kickstarter, from doing DCC zines to a $500,000 Kickstarter. So he's going to tell that story of how he got experience with the DCC zine and then went on to something great. So it's a mix of very, I'd call technical, specific advice, much more broad advice. We have one session which is called Taking the Leap, Advice from New Creators. And some of the topics we're going to cover there. And I was talking to a couple people who'll be in that session, and we wanted to talk about self-care. Like, it is honestly really stressful running a Kickstarter. A lot of people find it to be very stressful. So what do you do to survive those sleepless nights when you haven't yet funded? Things like that. So there's going to be a mix of technical advice and just frankly emotional and psychic advice, for lack of a better term. So that's days 1 and 2. Day 3 is the much more business-oriented day, and that is the day where you have to, quote, spend money to make money. So we charge $49 for day 3. That also covers, it actually costs us a lot of money to put together this Zoom thing. That covers all our costs too. And if you pay for day 3, you also get recordings from the first 2 days, because I don't think anybody's going to watch 10 hours a day for those first 3 days. But day 3 has a lot of, I think, topics that you will not find covered anywhere else in this industry. So we have, I mentioned earlier, fundamentals of RPG distribution, where you'll have 3 buyers from the industry. Just to say it, Michael Parker might sell 5,000 copies of your game next year, which means he might buy 5,000 copies from you. Like, these are people who can make a substantial difference in your business if you know how to work with them and can make the right arrangements. So you'll hear directly from distributors as to what they look for, how they operate, things like that. There's another session we just added called Fundamentals of RPG Translation Deals. So for those of you who don't know, a DCC RPG has been translated to Spanish, Italian, German, Portuguese, Brazilian Portuguese, and I am blanking on some language, so I'm sorry, whoever I forgot.
French?
French, yes. Sorry, Emmanuel. Yes, French. So we're going to have several of our translation partners appear to talk about how that works, and I'll offer my experience as well, what you should look for as a publisher trying to get a translation deal. We're going to have a session. I'm trying to think of some. There's a couple on, fundamentals of Facebook marketing. I mean, one of the things that made a huge difference in our Kickstarter sort of really going crazy starting in the year 2021 and 2022 was the way we started optimizing our Facebook marketing, which I know sounds like a very, businessy term, but we're partnering with BackerKit on the Creator Summit, and BackerKit is sending one of their experts to speak to this. And honestly, their Facebook ad optimization is incredible. When we did Facebook ads, Joseph Goodman Games doing it compared to how they do it, like, it's pretty impressive what a difference they make. And I keep telling them, like, you got to show some screen grabs or even live examples. I told them they can use my data and share it if they like. Show some live examples of the dashboards. They show creators and all the tuning they do to zero in on exactly which ad does best. In some ways, it can drive you nuts because we'll give them 20 ads, then like 2 of them do the best. And they're like, okay, can you make 10 variations on these 2 that did the best? And you do 20. Brett Brooks on my team, it's like he's like beating his head against the wall some days after he's done like 72 ads for the latest project. But we got to the point where we took the 2 best, did 20 variations on that, took the 2 best, did 20 more variations on that, and we're now running ads that are by far the most effective we've ever done. So it's an optimization exercise with many iterations. But BackerKit does an incredible job at what they do, and that is one of the things that's helped propel our Kickstarters. BackerKit's running another session called Launch, which is one of their tools, which you guys have used their launch tool. It makes a significant difference in how Kickstarters do.
Actually, I haven't. So I
Trevor, man, where you been?
I know I've run 10 Kickstarters and I have never used BackerKit. So I'm looking
Yeah, there was a Kickstarter that did over $1 million several months ago, and it's such crowdfunding is such an evolving field. Like what's happening this year is different from last year, and will be different from next year. And people learn tricks, and then everybody copies them, then it becomes the mainstream. But there was a creator, without getting into names and stuff, who basically created a launch page and had it up for like a year and just kept talking about his project, referring people to the launch page. And I watched that and I was amazed at how well it worked, because a year's worth of casual interest transformed into, when he launched, it was thousands and thousands of people who got notified the moment he launched. And it made a big difference. And that's what opened my eyes as to a new way to use. So if you haven't yet supported our Purple Planet project, go to the launch page now and click to follow. Because that's one of the techniques I learned. We're now putting our launch pages out months ahead of time, because it does sort of garner interest. But BackerKit has turned this into a science. They will be sending one of their experts to present on it. That's a 1-hour session. Sorry, one other thing, BackerKit's actually making an amazing offer. If you sign up for the $49 day 3, and I'm going to butcher this. Let me go to the webpage to make sure I say it right. They basically are going to give everybody an amazing discount if you use their services. So if you sign up for day 3, and then go to them to use their services, let me read this out loud so I don't say it wrong. Your launch fee will be waived, which I think is like a $99 saving. And if you run a project in 2024 on their platform or on Kickstarter, I believe, you get a $250 discount on all your fees and all your Facebook marketing fees and so on if you raise at least $5,000, which I think most of you guys can do that with your crowdfunding. So come listen to BackerKit talk. They are very skilled and have developed what I call the science of crowdfunding, and they're going to send some of their experts to talk. They have sessions, I think, on all 3 days, but particularly on day 3. Sorry, that was a long-winded answer. There is so much stuff we were covering. The other thing that I can actually tell you guys is Mike Merles just agreed to speak. So some of you know Mike Merles was the lead designer on D&D 5th edition. He has been doing this for a long time. He was a freelancer in the D20 era and then wound up working for Wizards of the Coast for decades and helped design D&D 5th edition. So he will be giving a talk on day 3 called My Secret Origin Story, and tell all that he knows about D&D 5e and design principles and so on. So there's just a lot of cool stuff that you can learn. And as far as I know, nobody's done anything like this. There have been design workshops and writers workshops. I haven't seen anything before on the business side of things. Sorry, one more thing. We have several YouTube presenters. YouTube is now like a feeder to a lot of crowdfunding channels. So we have several prominent YouTube creators who are going to be presenting. Jordan with a PH, Bob Worldbuilder, Mike Shea. I'm sorry, I don't want to forget anybody. Lucas presenting, a couple others. Sorry if I left anybody out. There's an amazing roster of people presenting with tools and techniques for growing your business.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a great opportunity. Ed and I are talking, I think, on day 1 for about an hour.
You guys are doing project fundamentals and costing, which I think, to your point, it's what you cover at Gen Con, but it is overlooked. People don't know it costs this much money to hire a writer, or this much money to get cover art, or this much money to print. And I think if you're, we want to address people who are either brand new, or I'd say maybe 1 or 2 projects in. And I think if you're at that stage, the session you guys are going to give, I think it's called Fundamentals of RPG Costing, something like that. It is going to be potentially a lifesaver for people who have no idea where to start. It is. I think we scheduled it as like the 3rd or 4th session, because it is the one you should start at if you are new at this.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. I know Ed is. We've been talking about it a bit, and actually there are things we've talked on the Scrivenery. So we're pulling several of the things we've talked about into 1 hour, a 1 hour presentation, everything. So I'm looking forward to it. But I am really looking forward to day 3 and seeing what else is on there, because there's definitely a lot of people that I'm excited to hear what they're doing. It's as a third party creator. Or an indie creator, let's just use that term in general. You're wearing a lot of hats, and so sometimes moving into new areas like BackerKit, or changing the way you let people know about your projects and everything, can be a little scary, B, really time consuming to figure out how to do it. I mean, like, I have given up on Facebook ads because I can't figure out how to make them work. Right. I probably just can't build really nice ads. But yeah, so that just doesn't work for me. So I'd love to hear how you can make that work, and what it takes. So
yeah, what's funny is, a creator, I think a lot of people, like, for example, people know if they're good artists or not. Everybody knows I'm good at drawing or I'm bad at drawing. Yeah. And so I think people are very comfortable hiring somebody else to make art for them. But people aren't often willing to, when it comes to painting your house, you'll do it yourself. because how hard can it be until you've like completely screwed it up, you know?
Right.
Yep.
And like, so I think there's a certain point where I had to learn there are people out there who are really good at digital marketing. That is a skill. So to your point, Trevor, yeah, you can do it yourself. And just like when you paint yourself, you'll get mediocre results. If you get somebody who's an expert, they more than pay for their costs, you know? Just like when you get a good person to paint your house, when you sell your house, it sells for more money. So yeah, I'd encourage, this is like general advice, but especially to the DCC third party community. One of the things I want this community to learn is how, like I said, we are the second biggest RPG rule system on Kickstarter, which is incredible. D&D 5e is number one by a long shot. We are second. However, the DCC third-party community of Kickstarters typically doesn't produce as many backers or volume as certain other niche games. There's other niche games that have far fewer Kickstarters, but they tend to produce more volume.
Mothership.
I think that's and I think that's in part because we are what I'll call an analog community. Like we see each other at cons. I think we have a lot more familiarity with certain aspects of, you know, convention marketing, for example, but aren't necessarily as Kickstarter savvy. There's probably 100 reasons for that. But if I could wave a wand and have the DCC third-party community learn something, it would be the day 3 stuff, especially the, you know, digital marketing strategies. Basically what BackerKit is teaching. Launch, Facebook, please, third-party community, go to that. It has substantially increased the number of people that Goodman Games can reach through our crowdfunding. I think we're quite adept at reaching people through distribution. I feel like I personally still have a lot to learn, which is why I actually, some of the people speaking on day 3 are because like, dude, I've seen what you did and I want to learn from it. So please come speak because I want to listen to you, you know, and I feel like the third party community actually has a lot that they could learn as well. And I think we can be not just the second most popular in terms of Kickstarters launched, but probably be the second most in terms of volume and backers if a lot of people attend and learn from this.
No, and I'm looking forward to that because running Kickstarters, Ed, I don't know what your experience is, and I'm sure that Joseph, yours is similar. Is you immediately get flooded with a whole bunch of people who want to sell you design and marketing skills, right? And I just you know I just clear those out because I don't want to hear from those people, you know, and so I'm looking for a way to find out who I should talk to and how to navigate that. Just you know because it's foreign to me.
Let me just make a quick pitch that to encourage anybody out, any of the viewers, for the, you know, certainly days 1 and 2, that's a no-brainer. But frankly, for the cost to get you day 3 and to get the recordings, I mean, that is a tremendous investment that I think will pay for itself multiple times over in terms of your ability to put out products and to reach more people. That this is a great deal, and I think anyone who's looking at, really, I think anybody who's in the third party community of the DCC sphere should give that very serious consideration, regardless. But certainly anybody who's into our viewership, that they want to look what they can do to expand their third party product scope and make themselves better. I mean, like, you know, just like you said, Joseph, boil it quite down simply, you got to spend money to make money. And quite frankly, this is not a lot of money to spend to get that kind of insight and that kind of nuanced advice that can really bring you to a new level.
Well put, Ed. Yeah, I should actually say, first of all, thank you to all the people who are appearing, because a lot of people have agreed to appear in the summit, and many of them are doing me a favor. And anyway, thanks to everybody who's appearing days 1, days 2, and days 3, because there's an amazing amount of knowledge coming together in one place, ready to be shared. And to your point, Ed, BackerKit's going to save you or offer you $250 in saving, actually $350, because it's the launch fee plus the savings overall. So you basically spend $49 to save $350 on their services. And to your point, Trevor, yeah, we all get flooded with the spam. I'm happy to endorse BackerKit as the most effective thing I've ever done for my crowdfunding. Specifically, their Facebook services Facebook ad optimization services were amazing. And their launch services have been extremely helpful to us as well. So I can connect you to my sales rep there if you'd like to go further. But that's
I would love to. Yeah.
Yeah, that's why they're doing this seminar. So to explain what they do.
Yep.
In fact, you know what? Let me actually. Elena, am I allowed to share my screen on this thing, or am I gonna like break something? Oh no, I'm not. Don't share my screen. Okay. At some point, if you guys want to have me back on, like at some point in the future, I will figure out how to prepare graphics and show you versions of my BackerKit dashboards to show you the sort of ad optimization they do. I'm happy to share actual Gummy Games results and stuff.
That
But
would be great.
it is scientific the way they approach it, and it's kind of amazing. There's math. There's a term called ROAS, return on ad spend, and another term called CPL, cost per lead. And you basically set up a bunch of math with them, and they optimize the ad performance towards that math. And you can choose to add backers at certain mathematical costs. So you can essentially pick a lane of you only want to add backers that are, that you don't pay a ton to get to them.
Mhm.
Or if you have certain projects where you just really want to increase your backer count because it's a core rulebook and that'll set you up for the next project or whatever.
Yep.
You can essentially spend a lot more money through certain mathematical models to recruit more people and be more aggressive in your ad optimization. But it is a whole science, and I hope they get really nitty gritty and talk to the science when they give their seminar. That's why I keep telling Martin to please have Crystal do that in the talk, because that is what I think is most interesting, how they really do make it a mathematical exercise, and it becomes I'm a bit of a nerd. That's what persuaded me. It wasn't like waving a magic wand, like we can totally make your sales better. It was like, look, man, here's the spreadsheet. This is how we're going to optimize your ads. Tell us what you want. That's kind of what sold me.
Cool. That's great. We are at the end of our time.
Sorry.
No, you're okay. You're okay. But I don't want Elena to be mad at us. I don't know if there's a show behind us or not.
Okay.
And so we're down to the last 2 or 3 minutes. So generally let's just take a moment and close out. We kind of last minute things you want to say. What do you want to tell us, Joseph? What do you want to tell the DCC third party community on making products and everything and about all the things we've talked about tonight? What
For the community out there, if you are on the fence and have never done it, I'm going to quote the Reverend Dak J. Ultimac, who said to me not long ago, "It doesn't matter if it's janky, just do it. Somebody's going to like it."
Yeah.
So the journey of 1,000 miles start with a single step. Please take that step. The only way you learn is by doing. Just do it. Get something out there, and that is how you will get somewhere.
And I'd like to follow that up. When Joseph was doing the Dark Library and Inquisitor was coming out, I was telling Joseph before the show that my good buddy Joel Phillips and I were working on a 40K zine called BMQ Quarterly, and everything, and we wrote hundreds of pages for it and never published it. And so that was my first zine experience from a creator side. It was a complete failure in terms of getting something out there to everybody, but I learned a ton doing it and everything. So you can't begin to understand the hurdles, the process, everything you're going to go through to get a product out there until you've actually tried it. And so there's nothing to stop you from trying it. It's okay to fail.
And Trevor, I have to share one more small anecdote on that subject. If you look at the credits for the Dark Library issue 4, published many, many years ago, I'm just going to read to you some of the credits here. Just tell me if you recognize any of these names.
Sure.
The articles were written by Brett Helgeson, Howard Liu, Michael Merles, Jay Naylor, Zach Nenas, M.I. Pennington, Joel Slovacek, Greg Taylor, Mark Thurer, and Nick Tompkins. I guarantee you recognize one of those names.
That's right.
As the guy who created D&D 5th edition.
Yep.
So he started out here.
And
just
probably
start.
in college at the same time. And it's
just
okay.
Do it.
Yep.
Just do it. Yes.
Just do it. I think that's a great way to send us off. Ed, do you want to say anything about Scrivenery? We're not going to come. This is our last episode for the year. We won't be back until next year, right?
Right. And then we've got some discussions in mind about what we're going to cover going into January. I just want to take 20 seconds just to express my personal gratitude for Joseph Goodman's approach with dealing with third-party publishers. The support that Goodman Games provides for the third-party community, to me, is just so uplifting and has helped me come into being a third-party publisher and live out my dream of putting out products for people to use.
Yeah, I'd have to second
Awesome.
that. I think it's a breath of fresh air. When I think about it, I think of the people who were writing zines in the 70s and 80s, and I ask questions like, where would Dave Hargrave's products, like the original Arduin stuff, be if TSR had embraced that, right?
Yeah.
Where there was so much creativity in these early zines, and if you guys, the Necromycan or Booty and the Beast by Errol Otis and things like this, where would those people have gone if they hadn't had barriers to stop them?
Yeah.
And so that's the thing that I think is really wonderful, is that those barriers are not there in this instance, and that's a great thing.
Well, with that, I'm afraid we're up against our time block, so we're going to have to head out, and we will see you all in January. Thanks for joining us tonight.
Yep. Have
Thanks,
a great
guys.
year, everybody.
Bye.